Hotel. Welcome to Journey in the Self. I'm your host, Sarah. Before we start, I want to give honor to Brother Steve Coakley, who did this important work long before me, and who's been an inspiration to me, certainly. And also to my spiritual teachers, Brother Dadisi and Dr. Alfred and his wife, Bernice Lagan, and as well to my spiritual master, Ama. Since we were last on, a lot of things have gone down, and so there's a lot of information that we have to cover. I don't know if we're going to get to it all, but we'll try, and we may end up having to do a follow-up on this one. But before we start, I want to put things in context again. It's always important for us to remember that we are first spirit, and we're here having a human experience, the objective of which is for us to remember that we are spirit beings and to return to our primary identification with ourselves as spirit beings. And upon having done so, we discontinue this journey of rebirth and birth and choose whether or not we want to continue to participate in the human drama. It's important as well to understand or understand, as I would say, that history and everything in the universe is cyclic. It's a cycle, it revolves. It's a circle. So I'll have to disappoint those who think the earth is flat, because that would make sense in a universe that operates as a spiral. And so it would stand to reason that everything in the universe would be circular. Time operates on a cycle. And our ancestors identified recurring patterns of time that occur during what on Earth we referred to, or they referred to, as the Great Cycle. And all civilizations track time in a similar manner and have noted that as cycles complete, that within each cycle, there are different characteristics that recur as a cycle unfolds. In what has come down to us as Western astrology, those are the different ages, which are denoted by the astrological charts, symbols, of which we are currently on the cusp of entering to the Aquarian age, the age of information. In the Hindu cycle of time, there are 4 yugas, of which the Kali Yuga is the darkest. And so similarly, we have just emerged from the Kali Yuga, which is at the lowest point in the cycle, and the Piscean, conversely, is one of the lowest parts of the cycle in Western astrology. And so we're on the ascendant part of the cycle. And in the yugas, we would be in the beginning stages of the Dwapara Yuga. Both of those denote a level of spiritual awakening, the beginning of an awakening process for humanity. Coming out of the darkness and into the light. So in Western astrology, that again is the Aquarian age, which are characterized by the words I know, as opposed to the prior keywords from the Piscean age, which is I believe. The Aquarian age is the age of information, so we see information is very easily attainable and is in abundance. During the dark periods of the cycle, dark forces are the ones who are preeminent and who control world affairs. But cycles revolve, and we move out of certain periods and ages and so forth. And so as we're moving out of the darker period and into light, the dark forces who have reigned during the dark periods, time is coming to an end as humanity moves towards the light, the awakening. So those dark forces who I'll refer to as the parasitical elite understand that their time is coming to an end. So what we see unfolding on the world stage is an act of desperation on their part to hold on to their control. Thus, we see events like 9/11, like the COVID-19 pandemic, which helped to facilitate the expansion of surveillance, which is necessary for them to be able to try to maintain control. Part of their weapons on top of surveillance is also emotional manipulation, keeping people in a continuous state of fear, because people tend not to be able to think rationally when they're caught up in that level of emotion, fear, or any kind of negative emotions, because they feed on each other. So fear, anger, desperation, hatred, lust, all those lower vibrational energies are constantly being emphasized to keep people resonating on a very low vibrations. Thus, we see music is of a very low vibrational nature. Programming, both music, television, and things like that, all those things are designed to keep people in a negative emotional state. So I thought that it would be important to put those things into context so that when we look at what is unfolding in the world stage, in the world drama, we see what the rationale is for the things that are unfolding that are being carried out by those dark forces, the parasitical elite, to be able to retain control and to prevent the awakening or delay the inevitable awakening of humanity as we move on the ascended part of the cycle. It's important that we keep that in context, because the way that we will be able to more effectively navigate the current circumstances is by maintaining our groundedness in our spiritual beingness, if you will. So, with that, there are a lot of things that are going on, so we'll just jump right into it. As we know, and as we talked about last time when we had our brother Sadiki Bakari as a guest, we took note of the fact that Fauci was on Capitol Hill being asked to testify about his part in the pandemic. And of course, we know that he declined and invoked the Fifth Amendment 111 times, which does have some numerical significance, which I'm not prepared to speak on. But so we'll pick it up from there and lay out some of the information that is being revealed. I think it was Rand Paul who was able to liberate Fauci's diary and to make it publicly available. And mind you, this information that is being revealed now is not new. It's just that it was suppressed during the time when it was first made public. Many of these things that we're going to go over, I had access to that information, and we did shows where we revealed the information, but we were going through censorship. And so those shows that we broadcast where we went over this information was censored and removed from social media. And anyone who dared to speak the truth was censored, attacked. Some people physically attacked, some had their careers ruined, but all to prevent the truth from being revealed. Okay, so here we see the Fauci diary sparks fresh COVID cover-up questions. This was published on August 3rd, 2026 by the Daily Clout online publication. It says newly released pages from Dr. Fauci's private pandemic-era diary are fueling renewed debate over whether the nation's top infectious disease official privately held a far more optimistic view of COVID-19's fatality rate than the one he later presented to Congress. Documents released by Senate Homeland Security Committee Chairman Senator Rand Paul ahead of last week's hearing include a February 8, 2020 diary entry describing a phone call between Fauci and former Centers for Disease Control and Prevention Director Tom Frieden. According to the handwritten notes, the two believed the virus is behaving more like a bad influenza or flu, and that the true fatality rate was likely more like 0.2 to 0.3%. That's not 3% or 2%. It's 0.2 or 0.3%. So because many mild or asymptomatic infections are not yet being counted. Now, I recall back in 2020 when the information was coming out about those who had died or were reported to have died from COVID. I calculated like around those same numbers. It was barely 1%, if it was that much. No more than the flu. And mind you, that those numbers were inflated because, as we knew back then, fatality rates were being padded because of the fact that anyone who died during the pandemic were classified as COVID-19 deaths, whether or not they actually died as a result of the virus. In other words, they padded the numbers and attributed COVID deaths when they were not actually deaths due to COVID. So the true fatality rate was more likely to be like 0.2 or 0.3%. Just over a month later, however, Fauci testified before the House Oversight Committee and publicly described a much higher fatality estimate. At the March 11, 2020 hearing, Fauci told lawmakers that reported mortality had initially been around 2 to 3%, not 0.2 or 0.3, but 2 to 3%, though he believed accounting for undetected infections would likely bring the figure closer to 1%. He warned Congress that COVID-19 appeared to be roughly 10 times more lethal than seasonal influenza. Again, when I calculated the numbers, and the numbers were being provided, because I remember there was a count of fatalities and a count of infections, and so it was just a simple math. You divided the number of fatalities by the number of the infected, and you get the percentage. And like I said, when I calculated it myself, it was no more than 1%. The contrast between the private diary entry and Fauci's public testimony has become a central focus of Republican lawmakers who argue it raises questions about how federal officials communicated risk during the earliest weeks of the pandemic. Diary is part of a larger release of more than 1,100 pages covering Fauci's meetings, phone calls, media appearances, and internal discussions from late 2019 and 2022. Senator Rand Paul says the documents challenge several aspects of the government's public COVID narrative, including discussions surrounding the virus's origin and pandemic messaging. And as we know, our last two shows, we went into great detail to document the origin of the virus, and we pointed out that it did originate at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. There were theories that it escaped because of the pure security measures there, but they were clearly developing it through gain of function research. So they were intentionally trying to create a virus. So whether it escaped or not, it was being developed with the intention of putting it out, because we also learned that they were simultaneously creating the vaccines. Okay, so among those criticizing Fauci is Dr. Harvey Risch, who argued that the newly released notes suggest federal officials may have amplified public fear, despite privately considering a significantly lower fatality estimate. Risch contends that presenting a mortality rate or estimate closer to 1%, while privately discussing figures around 0.02% and 0.03%, could have influenced public perception and support for sweeping migration measures. Its criticism reflects a broader argument that many of Fauci's Republican critics that the government relied on worst-case measures throughout much of the pandemic. We also do recall that because the governor of this state, um, Gavin Newsom, did indeed rely on worst case messaging, and that worst case statistical analysis that was run uh, indicated a much higher rate of infection, and that was what drove his policy decisions to basically shut down the economy in California, shut down restaurants and schools and so forth. And as we pointed out as well, we found documents going back to 2010 where this scenario was already played out and planned. Thus, some people have labeled the pandemic the plandemic. Former CDC Director Robert Redfield has also pointed to the dire release of supporting his long-standing criticism of the federal COVID response. In recent interviews, Redfield argued that the American public was misled on several issues, including the origins of the virus and expectations surrounding the COVID vaccines. Supporters of Fauci argue the apparent discrepancy should be viewed in the context of an unfolding global health emergency. Debatable. Estimating the virus's fatality rate during the earliest phase of an outbreak is notoriously difficult because confirmed cases often represent only a fraction of actual infections, and I completely disagree with that because, again, they overestimated the cases because they attributed anyone who went to the hospital for any reason. They were encouraged and hospitals were incentivized financially to classify admissions as COVID related. So the numbers were definitely skewed upward. Researchers have since documented that early CFR estimates frequently changed as testing expanded and more mild infections were identified. Academic studies published during the pandemic emphasized that fatality estimates were highly sensitive to incomplete testing, reporting delays, and evolving data. That also brings to my remembrance that the PCR tests were also highly inaccurate. And I had read into the record a document from the CDC that talked about the high error rate of the PCR tests. And so they had a high rate of giving false positives. So again, the numbers were inflated. The diary release contained additional information after Fauci appeared before the Senate Homeland Security Committee. I'll skip that. It just talks about the fact that he invoked the Fifth, and Democrats said it was politically motivated, though they never respond to the facts. The hearing has renewed long-standing disputes over federal response to COVID-19, debates about lockdowns, vaccine messaging, gain-of-function research, and the virus's origins. So we talked about all those things on the last show, so I won't rehash any of that. Okay. Bear with me so I can get back to. It's unfortunate that I have to scroll back down to where I was. But as you can see, since we had the last show, and my practice is to save all the information that I think is most relevant, so that I'll have it and then refer back to it. So you see, there's a lot of things that I saved here that I think are highly relevant to be discussed. So just bear with me as I go through that to get to where we need to be. And that was some information about the vaccines in general, and questioning whether or not, or basically the efficacy of vaccines. Okay, so that's where we were. Okay, we see here Gates is behind a number of things. One of those things is creating the first ever synthetic viruses using AI. And we know that Gates's father was a eugenicist, and he's the eugenicist. And he was caught, recorded, giving a TED talk where he stated that vaccines would be one of the things that they would use in order to effect depopulation or population control. So here it seems they're developing synthetic viruses using AI. And I would suggest that they're developing synthetic diseases as well. Yeah, we see where people who refused to take the vaccine were ostracized, threatened with the loss of jobs, made fun of, um, and a lot of these people who were subject to this type of ridicule are being vindicated as more information comes out about the problems that the vaccine itself has been causing people, and that people are getting sick at the best and dying from the vaccine side effects. And unfortunately, we continue to see people, athletes, more prominently, because we know who they are. But we see actors, actresses passing away. Dolly Parton just made her transition, though she is 80 years old. I just saw that she was one of those who did receive the vaccine and was encouraging people to take it. And she took it publicly to motivate people to do so. Okay, here's another one that's also significant, because not only did Fauci overestimate or not overestimate, but uh, overstated publicly the infection rate of COVID-19, he also understated the dangers of the vaccine. And in this instance, he privately warned of the risk of miscarriages due to the vaccine. Privately, he warned privately, but during the public discourse, he didn't say he said that there was no risk of miscarriages. Okay, so we'll just go briefly into this article from Carrie Bundy, health activist, says exposed. Fauci privately warned of miscarriage risk from COVID vaccine while publicly insisting no red flags for pregnant women. Newly released text messages obtained from Dr. Fauci's government-issued cell phone reveal a stunning double standard that should infuriate every parent, every expectant mother, and every American who trusts the public health officials. On January 25th, 2021, in a private exchange with then CDC Director Rochelle Walensky and Surgeon General Vivek Murthy, Fauci wrote, I asked around a bit more and another issue came up that you need to be aware of. Since many people have significant cytokine storms and fever after the second dose, my goodness. This theoretically could be associated with miscarriage in the first trimester. Walensky replied that the first trimester issues he raised were definitely a good point, especially after dose 2. Just days later, on February 3rd, 2021, Fauci told a JAMA live stream audience the complete opposite. The FDA found thus far, and we have to be careful, but thus far, no red flags about pregnant women. Months after that private warning, he went even further, declaring, tens and tens and tens of thousands of women who have been followed by the CDC, who have been vaccinated when they were pregnant. There's no indication whatsoever that there's any increase of any adverse issues in a pregnant woman who was vaccinated compared to pregnant women who wasn't vaccinated. It's pretty clear that pregnant women should get vaccinated. The text released by Senators Rand Paul and Ron Johnson for more than 34,000 messages and 522 voicemails pulled from Fauci's phone show top officials quietly weighing theoretical risks of miscarriage while the public was told the shots were safe and necessary for pregnant women. How many women made irreversible decisions based upon the public messaging? How many were never informed of private concerns circulating at the highest levels? This is a profound breach of trust. When officials discuss potential risks to unborn children in private text, but project absolute confidence in public, the public has every right to demand answers and accountability. American people deserve the full picture in real time. Instead, they got a curated certainty. This should enrage anyone who believes science and transparency matter. Trust the science, right? And I also want to re-emphasize this point. This has nothing to do with politics or where anyone is on the political spectrum. I do not belong to either party. I would not consider myself to be either conservative or liberal. I don't care where the information comes from. I only care about the truth of the information. So if you see information, and I do have some that may come from conservative sources, be also mindful that what's considered to be conservative conspiracy theory now was considered to be liberal conspiracy theory 20 years ago. So don't go there with me. We only care about the truth. We don't care about what package it comes in. Now here says the FDA hit serious safety signal. When the FDA licensed Moderna's new mRNA flu vaccine last week, legacy media coverage focused almost exclusively on efficacy. What received far less scrutiny was a much more serious problem in the trial data published in, I remember that, in the New England Journal of Medicine, much of it related to an appendix behind a paywall. And this is again also from Carrie Bundy, health activist, August 10th. Alert, FDA approves Moderna's first mRNA flu shot while quietly burying a statistically significant safety signal. Last week, the FDA licensed Moderna's new mRNA influenza vaccine, mRNA 1010. Mainstream coverage celebrated a 26.6 higher efficacy figure versus a traditional flu shot, yet almost no one, looked past the headline number or behind the paywall of the New England Journal of Medicine appendix. Here's what the pivotal phase 3 trial, it's at page 304, of nearly 40,000 adults aged 50 plus actually showed. Absolute risk reduction for influenza-like illness, just 0.08%. 4 fewer flu-related hospitalizations in the mRNA arm, but 60 excess serious adverse events. 449 participants in the mRNA group versus 389 in the conventional vaccine group. Serious adverse events, SAEs, are not mild side effects. They include events requiring hospitalization, life-threatening conditions, significant disability or death, and that imbalance was significant, very unlikely to be chance. Yet, in the official briefing documents presented to the Vaccines and Related Biological Products Advisory Committee, the agency described SAEs as balanced. How did a clear signal disappear? The FDA switched from the pivotal trial data to Moderna's integrated safety summary, pooling 4 different phase 3 trials involving nearly 72,000 people. Those trials use different mRNA formulations, different comparator vaccines, standard dose, high dose, trivalent, quadrivalent, different age groups, different countries, and different follow-up periods. Once diluted across this heterogeneous mix, the serious adverse event rates became 3.1% versus 2.9%, close enough for regulators to call them balanced. So they basically just manipulated the numbers until they got to a number that was acceptable. The agency's own appendix even acknowledged that differences between trials could produce safety variations not fully captured by pooled analysis, yet they proceeded anyway. Look closer at the timing trick. For the first 28 days when events were still balanced, the FDA reported the clean, pivotal trial numbers. And mind you, this is in their actual trials before it was released. After the vaccines were released, there was a serious adverse event tracker where people who reported adverse effects were accumulated. But even with that, and it did show a high rate of serious adverse events, but the number of those were underreported as well, because many people weren't aware that such a thing existed for them to report. So we'll go back to the article as SAEs, serious adverse events, accumulated over the following months, and the imbalance grew statistically significant. They switched to the pooled data that washed the signal away. Mortality patterns raised further questions. In the pivotal trial alone, there were 40 deaths in the mRNA arm versus 34 in the comparator, while earlier sub-studies showed significant higher deaths in the mRNA groups, including 1 death associated by trial investigators as vaccine-related. The double standard is glaring. For efficacy claims, the FDA insisted on only using the pivotal trial of the exact formulation being licensed, even though earlier versions had weaker or even negative efficacy. For safety, when the pivotal trial looked unfavorable, they pooled everything. On the surface, the vaccine is labeled as safe and effective. Under the surface lies a statistically significant excess of serious harm, diluted by selective data handling that the FDA accepted. When a regulator adopts a manufacturer's preferred analysis in a way that maximizes efficacy claims while minimizing safety signals, who is actually protecting the public? No one, because if you actually look at who works for the FDA and where they worked prior to joining the FDA, you would come to that conclusion that there is no protection because those people either came from the pharmaceutical industry or were lobbyists for the pharmaceutical industry or were getting significant kickbacks from the pharmaceutical industry and or after they left went to work as lobbyists. So, and that's why to this day right now we see a plethora of advertisements every time we turn on the television to watch anything, whether it be sporting events or movies, television shows. You cannot watch anything on television these days without seeing some type of pharmaceutical advertising, which typically uses mentions about like 10 or 15 adverse side effects, much of which include many of which includes death as the most serious side effect. And I did point out last time that when I went to Moderna's website back in 2020, and they've since altered the website, so it no longer says that. But when I went to the website, they did say that their mRNA vaccine did alter the DNA, and they referred to it as software to reprogram the DNA. And I'm sure if I were to go through my archives, I think I still have that somewhere. And when I find it, I'll bring it forward. But in the previous show, I did show it, and I went to the website and read it. Okay, so here we see another collapse by a young athlete. Just cornerback Stigers taken to the hospital after collapsing at practice. We'll go into this. Maybe I'll come back to that. But everyone knows about the data centers and I'll come back to this. That's a significant issue as well. Data centers seem to be using a lot of water, but this man who created his own data centers and runs data centers points out that data centers don't require anywhere near that type of water. So they've been lying about the water requirements while depriving people of water. But Jamal points out that Pfizer and their spokesperson, the Kansas City Chiefs tight end Travis Kelce, has their ads all over NFL games, including the COVID vaccine, and he was a proponent, an advocate of the Pfizer vaccine, and touted as a hero, while Aaron Rodgers, who refused the vaccine, was criticized as a pariah. Let's go to this one. More information that validates the information that I first found on Newsweek back in 2020 about the origin of the COVID-19 virus. And this is in the New Atlantic publication written by Dan Silver. Let's see if we have a date. Apologize that there's not a date there, but we'll read this into the record. So there's a new piece of the puzzle of COVID's origins, Wuhan's biohazard disposal system. So for the cascade of failures in the month leading up to COVID, new revelations that official investigators have overlooked. Okay, so here's the leak theory. But again, I'll point out, this was gain of function research. And so the intent was to develop the virus. And they simultaneously developed the vaccine. So whether it escaped because of the poor security measures at the Wuhan Institute is really moot, because it was going to be released, whether intentionally or intentionally. And here's the date of the article, August 5th, 2026. Okay, so the article says, nearly 7 years ago, the world was about to awaken to the fact that a novel means new, novel pneumonia from Wuhan, China, was becoming the most disruptive global event in living memory. The intervening years have produced significant scientific understanding about this event, but not complete transparency. Key facts have surfaced slowly and increasingly not at all, impeded by the passage of time and the protective layers of Chinese bureaucracy, which is not actually true. This information was out, like I said, in 2020, and I do remember one of a Chinese woman spoke out at the time, like right after the spread of COVID-19 began in China, before he even reached here. She came out and said that it was created there, and that it was didn't come from some, they were saying, this wet market, where they were selling bats and animals or whatever. She said it was created in the lab, and that woman ended up going missing, and I think she went into hiding because she feared for her life. Okay, so yeah, and so there was, after it escaped, both the U.S. government and China's government tried to cover it up because they were working together. What follows is an account of events that precede the outbreak and that have been overlooked in official records. These events don't directly explain how COVID-19 began. They don't establish a laboratory origin, but they show that Wuhan's laboratories, some of which were performing dangerous virological research in 2019, were operating at the same time under considerable strain as the region's waste disposal infrastructure experienced a number of significant failures. Again, we documented before that the National Institute of Health provided 2 separate grants of $3.7 million to the Wuhan Institute of Virology to conduct gain of function research to develop a bat virus and to see if basically they can take the bat virus and make it something that could be transferred to humans. So he says, for more than 2 decades, I served as a reporter for the Program for Monitoring Emerging Diseases, or ProMed-Mail, the world's leading early warning system for infectious diseases. That capacity reported on hundreds of disease events, mainly in China. It was recognized with the award for early reporting on SARS in 2003. The work demanded close, sustained attention to the public record. The media reports in a place where official communication is characteristically opaque. I applied those same research skills here to examine the months preceding the emergence of COVID-19 in Wuhan. Sources underlying this account are all public, although some are confined to relatively remote corners of the Chinese internet. Local research institutions place a substantial amount of information in the public domain, including public tenders, procurement contracts, formal institutional acknowledgement of regulatory noncompliance, newspaper reports, and government announcements documented disasters at key nodes of the province laboratory waste disposal network, and field research that clearly breached the customary safety boundaries of a community health laboratory that was not merely described but celebrated in state media. These sources were there for the finding. There's no sign that the Chinese government attempted to suppress or conceal them. Rather, it appears that those tasked with understanding the origins of the greatest pandemic in over a century simply failed to probe the available record, taking superficial accounts as complete or seeking data that would confirm suppositions already formed. Lost in the process was the fundamental principle that the most consequential scientific questions demand the most rigorous pursuit of evidence. What caused the COVID pandemic is one of those questions. Question of failure. He goes on and talks about, some incidents that occurred at the Wuhan laboratory of virology or Institute of Virology. Fire hazardous waste being escaping, from it. Another incident where toxins escaped the laboratory. It says, meanwhile, at Wuhan, CDC itself, a separate long-standing failure had been quietly compounding. Since 1994, hazardous waste, designated HW49, had been accumulating in its storage. So this is really just going on to explain just that the Wuhan laboratory was very insecure in terms of being able to prevent the spread of toxins that were being developed in that laboratory. Tian Junhua, a field researcher at the same Wuhan CDC, became something of a public symbol of that culture. He was initially known as an intrepid hero in China's quest to identify novel pathogens through field research, and the safety risks associated with his work received little scrutiny at the time. So apparently he was engaged in gain-of-function research. In December 2019, as later reported by the Washington Post, Chinese state media released a video of him collecting bats in caves while wearing thin gloves and a surgical mask, protective measures grossly inadequate by international biosafety standards. The samples he collected were presumably returned for analysis to the Wuhan CDC, which is not licensed or equipped to handle unknown viruses of this sort. Residential material from these kinds of analysis could have ultimately joined the institution's long neglected stockpile. Again, go back and look at the COVID virus. The gain of function research that was going on was the transfer of bat viruses to humans, and if they want to know if bat viruses could be made transferable to humans. Okay. We'll skip ahead. Okay. 7 years on, the significance of these events is not primarily about attribution or blame. It's about systematic fragility. Wuhan in 2019 was home to some of the world's most consequential virology research. It was not home to institutional transparency, regulatory enforcement, infrastructure redundancy that research of that nature demands. Okay, so this information here again supports the theory that the virus escaped the laboratory. But again, we documented that they were doing the gain of function research and based upon the grant that had been given to them by the National Institute of Health. And we pointed out that the reason that it was being done there was because it was gain of function research was banned in the United States. So they closed the laboratory in Fort Detrick, Maryland, for essentially the same reason that the Fort Detrick, Maryland laboratory wasn't secure enough to prevent toxins from escaping the laboratory. So they banned that type of research in the United States and basically contracted it out to the Wuhan Institute in China. I'm going to skip this one for now. We'll come back to the Strait of Hormuz and the Iran-Iraq war, which continues to increase gas prices and escalate inflation. And I'll just say, as I mentioned that, and the increase of inflation, we know that a new Fed chairman has been put in place, ostensibly to reduce interest rates at the behest of Trump. I'll just point out that anyone who thinks that rates are going to be lower, I would say don't hold your breath about that coming to fruition. Largely because of the inflation that is being stoked by the closure of the Strait of Hormuz as a result of the war that's being waged with Iran in conjunction with the United States and Israel. Because gas prices have gone up, the cost of transportation has gone up, which ends up getting passed to consumers, which ends up increasing the prices of goods, which is inflation. Now, the tool that the Federal Reserve uses to be able to slow inflation is raising interest rates. Okay. And so lowering interest rates actually increases inflation. So I would be very surprised if the United States or the Federal Reserve decided to lower interest rates because of the concern about inflation. Okay, so let's listen to what Nurse Gail McCrae has to say She was on the scene when people were being admitted to the hospitals for alleged COVID. And she describes what happened to them under the hospital's care. We'll just read this and then we'll listen to what she has to say. Nurse Gail McCrae says patients were dying from COVID protocols. I'll read that again. Whistleblower nurse Gail McCrae says patients were dying from COVID protocols, not the virus, and effective treatments were blocked. Severe COVID patients were showing extremely high levels of inflammation, and some ICU doctors were advocating high-dose IV steroids early in 2020 to control that inflammatory response. She says steroids were withheld from some COVID patients and that the nebulizer treatments were also restricted because of concerns about aerosoling the virus and exposing healthcare workers. She also says some healthcare workers privately questioned the protocols, but were afraid to speak publicly. So let's listen to what she has to say.
Conversations with my colleagues in the back room, and we'll be talking about these COVID protocols and how they're causing these patients to go into organ failure, but they won't say anything about it because they're too afraid of getting rejected by their peers. They're too afraid of losing their jobs to stand up and step into their authentic knowing, which is that our protocols were killing people. So the protocols for COVID, people say their loved ones died of COVID. I'm sorry, but that's not the way it went down. People actually died in the hospital from the protocols. So we knew in March of 2020, there was one of the most published and prestigious ICU doctors in the United States. His name was Dr. Pierre Corey. He came out right out the gate. Everyone who has COVID is responding extraordinarily well to high doses of IV steroids. And of course, so it made perfect sense. I looked at their data and I looked at what I know because I've worked ICU. I know the whole hospital. When a patient is going into an inflammatory response, so that's something people should know about COVID. COVID, whatever it was, it caused more inflammation in the human body than we'd ever seen from any infectious disease in my career as a nurse working for the hospitals. So that was over 10 years. So, and we measure that by labs. There's a lab called a CRP, and you can clearly see how much inflammation is in the body when a person is under attack. You know, their immune system is under attack. So we had CRP levels that were more than double that I had ever seen. I mean, they were out the roof. And so because I knew that, and then I heard these ICU intensivists that were nationally known for their expertise come out and say, we need to be giving all these patients high-dose steroids because immediately their bodies would respond. And of course they would. Steroids are an anti-inflammatory. Mm-hmm. They correct the inflammatory response. So that was March of 2020. That was before the vaccines, before anything happened. We knew that we had an effective tool for managing the inflammation of COVID. And the CDC and the leadership for our health industries in the United States completely shut that down. So that's when they started labeling Pierre Corey. And that was just what? Like, this guy has been nationally known for his whole career for his ability to, brainstorm and come up with solutions for really intensive situations rapidly. Like, he had already made a name for himself in the United States medical organizations because of his expertise. And so, it just didn't make any sense. Like, how can they censor this man who clearly doesn't have an agenda? He's clearly offering a solution that A, makes sense, B, actually works. And he has the background and expertise to make that recommendation. So why is the medical why are the medical agencies ignoring him? So there we are, right, through the first year of COVID, not administering high-dose IV steroids. And that, to me, so when I analyze that from my medical background and the oath that I took and my duty as a medical practitioner, A, to do no harm, but B, to save the lives of my patients. And now we're being forced to withhold a treatment that I know would save their lives. So we were withholding steroids. We were also withholding nebulizer treatments. So
What is that?
when patients are hospitalized in acute respiratory distress, they are always prescribed nebulization treatments. So what they do is they use this drug. There are several different ones. I'll have conversations with my colleagues in the back room, and we'll be talking about these COVID protocols and how they're causing these patients to go into organ failure, but they won't say anything about it because they're too afraid of getting rejected by their peers. They're too afraid of losing their jobs to stand up and step into their authentic knowing, which is that our protocols were killing people. So the protocols for COVID, people say their loved ones died of COVID. I'm sorry, but that's not the way it went down.
Bear with me. So she was talking about the fact that essentially the protocols that the bank, that the hospitals were implementing to treat patients were actually would cause people to die. As she was talking about some of the treatments, I remember reading that one of the treatments that was being touted to treat COVID-19 was a drug called remdesivir, which many medical professionals, particularly the nurses, were very reticent to use remdesivir because they knew that once they administered remdesivir, it was certain death, and they colloquially referred to remdesivir as when death is near. Here's another article. This is from Law Enforcement Today, August 17th of this year. It says ABC News has a Fauci problem. Former correspondent Terry Moran says his 2021 COVID lab leak investigation was rewritten into something incomprehensible, and that when he demanded an explanation, the answer he received was one word: Fauci. Moran says his team produced a balanced Nightline investigation examining arguments for and against a possible laboratory origin. What came back after the network's review barely resembled their work. ABC can settle this immediately, release the original script, the final version, and the name of everyone who reviewed and influenced it. If a government official or his office helped shape a news report about an issue involving the same official, Americans deserve to know. And I titled this a censorship because that is exactly what was going on when all this was actually going down back in 2021. Anyone who did not adhere to the official narrative was at best censored and at worst, banned or discredited. Here we see one of Fauci's cohorts has pled guilty to plotting to conceal COVID-19 research records during the pandemic. And we'll listen to a little bit of this. It's really short. Yeah, we'll just go ahead and listen to it now, and then we'll read the article.
Hiding emails about the origin. New this afternoon, a former top advisor to Dr. Anthony Fauci is facing federal charges. Yesterday, the Justice Department announced the indictment of David M. Lorenz. He's accused of hiding emails about the origins of COVID-19. The DOJ also says he used private email accounts to avoid public records requests. The criminal case is now in the hands of a federal court.
Sorry, I'm a little rusty. Oh yeah, East Pacific. Chris has got me covered.
Okay, so we'll read this article. A former, and this is AP, article came out on August 18th, 2026. Greenbelt, Maryland, a former senior advisor to infectious disease expert Dr. Anthony Fauci pleaded guilty Tuesday to plotting to conceal federal records related to research on the origins of the deadly COVID-19 pandemic. Dr. David Morris is scheduled to be sentenced on November 12th by U.S. District Judge Paul Lazenis in Greenbelt, Maryland. Morris pleaded guilty to conspiring to defraud the U.S. government, a felony punishable by a maximum prison sentence of 5 years. By pleading guilty today, Dr. Morris has taken responsibility for what he did, and he will continue to do so, defense attorney Tim Belovitz said in a statement after the plea hearing. Morris is accused of using his private email account to intentionally circumvent public records laws while employed at the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. The Justice Department alleges that he concealed or destroyed records of discussions related to COVID-19 research grants, including an effort to revive a controversial coronavirus grant. Remember, I said, based upon the article one of the articles that I found in Newsweek, the National Institute of Health made two $3.7 million grants to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. The indictment follows a probe by House Republicans into the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic that scrutinized Morin's email communications and accused him of intentionally concealing records. In congressional testimony, Morris denied attempting to evade federal transparency laws by using his personal email. And as we know, when questioned about these things in the Senate, Fauci pleaded the fifth 111 times.
One thing is abundantly clear. The Lutnick family, Bo Hines, and the President of the United States have benefited from their relationships with the shady offshore crypto company. My name, as you said, has been Mackenzie Shankin. I'm an author and filmmaker. I spent the last several years documenting fraud and other criminal activity in the cryptocurrency industry.
Okay. This is, we'll depart from a discussion about Fauci and the COVID-19 origins. One of the things that has been unfolding in the country has been the the advent of cryptocurrency not only for its original use, ostensibly cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin were created to circumvent the basically what do I want to say? Basically, to circumvent the Federal Reserve System, the fiat currency, and create a means of exchange that was decentralized from the government. That was what ostensibly Bitcoin was created for. Now, though those may have been altruistic intentions, cryptocurrency ended up becoming a currency of choice for criminal money laundering and illicit financing of criminal transactions. Today, because the popularity of cryptocurrency and the number of companies that have come to the forefront as pioneers in cryptocurrency, the government has been making a push to legitimize cryptocurrency and come up with its own cryptocurrencies. Some people refer to those as stable coins. Much less volatile, pegged to some type of currency, pegged to the dollar or something like that, or less volatile type of currency. Now, what has happened more recently is that because of the ties that many officials in the Trump administration have to cryptocurrency, that it is being further legitimized. Not only has it been legitimized, but it's also been, legislation has been crafted to be favorable to companies that are directly associated with the Trump administration. Like the Genius Act is created to benefit directly one of the companies that is closely tied to Trump, and I think his organization has a significant investment in this company that actor Ben McKenzie is going to discuss here. Additionally, bank regulatory agencies have been encouraged to charter banks that deal in cryptocurrencies and have some type of relationship with cryptocurrency companies. This is concerning because people have always traditionally gone to banks as a safe harbor for their money, knowing that they're not going to get a significant return for saving their money there, but they were willing to accept a lower return under the auspices of the banks being a safe place to keep their money. As we know, cryptocurrency is extremely volatile. And so bringing that type of risk into the banking realm is concerning. So with that, setting that up, I will play the video from Ben McKenzie, who was one of my more recent favorite actors because of him playing Jim Gordon on one of my favorite television shows, Gotham.
Is abundantly clear. The Lutnick family, Bo Hines, and the President of the United States have benefited from their relationships with the shady offshore crypto company. My name, as you said, has been Mackenzie Shanken. I'm an author and filmmaker. I spent the last several years documenting fraud and other criminal activity in the cryptocurrency industry. It is timely that we are here today as Congress considers new legislation, the Clarity Act, to regulate the crypto sector. I believe we are at a point of crisis when it comes to crypto's influence over our legislative process. Recent reporting from just last week reveals a foreign company that issues a cryptocurrency used by major criminal organizations appears to have shaped Trump's signature piece of legislation, the Genius Act, while at the same time forging deep financial relationships with members of the executive branch. When it comes to potential crypto crimes, the call is coming from inside the White House. Some relevant background. In the midst of running for re-election in 2024, Donald Trump suddenly pivoted to embracing cryptocurrency, having previously called it a scam as recently as 2021. At the same time, Trump developed close ties to Howard Lutnick, the then chairman and CEO of financial services firm Cantor Fitzgerald. Lutnick was a major fundraiser for Trump's campaign. According to the New York Times, he donated or raised more than $75 million for groups supporting Mr. Trump in the 2024 cycle. When Trump was reelected, he nominated Lutnick to be Secretary of Commerce, an office which he now holds. Lutnick has an extensive financial relationship with the largest crypto company in the world, Tether. Cantor Fitzgerald was then and remains to this day the broker for the offshore crypto giant. Not only that, but in 2024, Lutnick negotiated a deal that allowed Cantor to purchase a stake in Tether, worth multiple billions of dollars for only $600 million. Tether has issued 184 billion Tether tokens it claims are backed by $184 billion of real money and investments, but to this day, we still don't know if those claims are true. Tether has never been audited, and in 2021, the company paid $61 million to settle claims brought by the New York Attorney General and the CFTC that it misled investors about its reserves. Much has been written about how Tether is used by organized crime all over the world. In a UN report from 2024, it notes that Tether is the, quote, preferred choice for crypto money launderers in Southeast Asia. Tethers have been used for international drug cartels, as well as by terrorist organizations like Hamas. They have been used for sanctions evasion and tax evasion in countries like Russia and Iran. The fact that our current Secretary of Commerce has a financial relationship with a company that issues a product which is an interest, let me start over. The fact that our current Secretary of Commerce has a financial relationship with a company that issues a product which is an instrument of crime on a global scale ought to be troubling enough to warrant further investigation. But recent reporting lays out an even more disturbing fact pattern. Last week, Bloomberg released its investigation into how Tether influenced the White House on the Genius Act via Lutnick and Bo Hines, the then 29-year-old former college football player who was appointed executive director of the President's Council of Advisors on Digital Assets. According to Bloomberg, in late 24, through the following spring, Lutnick and Hines worked behind the scenes to loosen safeguards and shape the law in ways that benefited the world's dominant stablecoin issuer, Tether. What did Tether get out of the Genius Act? Under what is known as the reciprocity loophole, the Genius Act allows for Tether stablecoin to be regulated by El Salvador, as long as the U.S. Treasury Secretary determines the Salvadoran regulatory regime to be comparable to that of the U.S. In the course of my reporting, I have traveled to El Salvador, and I would be happy to answer any questions as to my experience there. But to put it mildly, Tether's relationship to El Salvador's president, Nayib Bukele, is unusual. In addition to the reciprocity provision, the Genius Act carved out the DeFi loophole that absolves crypto companies like Tether from any obligation to track their products on secondary markets. This means criminals of all kinds can continue to use Tethers while the company can continue to claim no responsibility. Lastly, the Genius Act contains a 3-year grace period before companies like Tether have to comply with US law. According to Bloomberg, some Democrats wanted 18 months, but Hines stepped in and announced that 3 years was the White House's, quote, red line. Where did this red line come from? Was it at the behest of Tether executives? In August 2025, Bo Hines left his position in the administration 1 month after the bill was signed into law. The very next month, he became the CEO of Tether's US operations. The month after that, October 2025, Tether executives made a loan to a trust benefiting Howard Lutnick's children as they were in the process of purchasing their father's business interests. It's worth noting that the Trump family itself has also profited from Tether, albeit indirectly. In December 2024, Tether invested $775 million in the money-losing company Rumble, which runs President Trump's Truth Social platform. We still don't know the exact contours of the financial relationships between President Trump, Secretary Lutnick, Bo Hines, and Tether. But one thing is abundantly clear. The Lutnick family, Bo Hines, and the President of the United States have benefited from their relationships with the shady offshore crypto company. We can't vote on clarity unless we know what happened with the Genius Act. The American public deserves to know more about their financial ties to Tether. I encourage the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations to pursue that line of inquiry. I thank you for your time, and I look forward to your questions.
Okay, so there's a lot more that I've saved with the intent of covering it on the show, but we're not going to get to it all, or else we'll be here until midnight, which I have no intention of doing. So we'll leave it there. Pick it up next time. And I will say that, as I pointed out at the beginning, there's a lot of things going on. And we are spirit beings. Everything that unfolds here in the human drama is ultimately designed to bring us back into our knowingness of who we are as spirit beings, to bring us back to our union with Source. So the fact that, we find ourselves in such trying times and we are facing such challenges, to be able to maintain our peace in the midst of such chaos provides us with more motivation to be able to go within and be at peace within ourselves. So there is always a reason behind the things that unfold, with the ultimate objective of bringing us back to Source. And so be mindful of that. Use this as motivation to be able to engage in your spiritual practice. Learn and master meditation. Learn to be able to transcend being caught up in the low vibrations that are being that we are being inundated with and being influenced to lower our vibrations into. Let us be able to bring ourselves into immunity from those things by being able to detach from those things that would derail us from our path to our journey into self. So with that, I'll end the show tonight and greet you in the Kemetic words of peace, Hotep, and we'll see you next time here on Journey into Self.